What are FODMAPs? Is a low FODMAP diet right for you? In today's video, we have 7 major questions that we're going to answer. We're going to start with what are FODMAPs? Then we'll move along to how do FODMAPs create gastrointestinal issues? Next, we'll discuss who might benefit from a low FODMAP diet. Then we'll move on and discuss in wheat and wheat products, is it the FODMAPs or the gluten, at least for most people? How does a low FODMAP diet improve the gut? What are the negatives of doing a low FODMAP diet? And finally, how to use a low FODMAP diet to improve your gut health. FODMAPs are rapidly fermentable short-chain carbohydrates. FODMAPs are an acronym for fermentable oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. And all that means by fermentable is that bacteria in your gut can ferment them. They can become problematic when they are either poorly digested or poorly absorbed. That way they are accessible by the microbes to ferment, cause gas and bloating and things of that nature. This typically is going to cause more problems in the large intestine, but it can also cause gas and bloating in the small intestine as well. There are many different factors affecting FODMAP intolerance. So when we look at this kind of overall picture, what we see is things like fiber, as well as different FODMAPs, which are oligosaccharides, di and monosaccharides. They get to the colon where they're unabsorbed. A large dose of this can cause a ton of gas and bloating, but it also creates the production of different metabolites from bacteria fermenting these unabsorbed carbohydrates. So ultimately, it's the total amount of unabsorbed carbohydrate that are going to hit the large intestine, and so we have a number of different ways we can have an intolerance to FODMAPs. The first is genetic. You can have a genetic enzyme deficiency. For example, you may have a sucrase isomaltase deficiency, which prevents you from breaking down these sugars into things that you can absorb rather than that are going to make it to the colon and ferment. Same with lactase. Lactase is the enzyme that breaks down lactose. So what happens is if you have lactase deficiency or lactose intolerance, a lot of lactose is going to make its way into the colon where it can cause gas and bloating or draw in water to cause diarrhea. Dysbiosis, microbial dysbiosis, so if you have things like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth or overgrowth of certain types of even beneficial microbes, if you give them a large dose of these unabsorbed carbohydrates, they're going to cause a lot of gas and bloating. They're going to create these metabolites. They're going to draw water into the colon because there are a high number of solutes within the colon, and to even that out, they pull water into the colon from the blood. And finally, secondary issues, having inflammation can impact the ability of your enzymes to do their job. Your diet, you can simply just be eating too many FODMAPs. There's probably an upper limit for everybody for the amount of FODMAPs you consume, fiber as well. So if you're just overall eating too much food or overall eating too many of these foods that are high in FODMAPs for your own personal taste, you could have issues. Additionally, co-ingredients matter. For example, when we consume fructose or glucose, we're kind of getting both of them together. But when we consume fructose without glucose, we actually have a decreased ability to absorb fructose. So fructose, when paired with glucose, is less likely to stick around in the intestines. You're going to be more likely to absorb it, and it's less likely going to make it to the colon where it can be fermented by microbes. How FODMAPs cause issues. Now, we mentioned if you deliver a lot of FODMAPs to the colon, you're going to get tons of fermentation, which is going to lead to gas and bloating. You're going to have these increases in solutes in the colon. To even that out, you're going to pull water from the blood into the colon, which is going to lead to things like diarrhea. Also, an increased bacterial load. So when you're getting these bacteria fermenting these FODMAPs like crazy, you're going to increase the amount of bacteria in your gut. This is going to increase the amount of something called lipopolysaccharide, which is a component of gram-negative bacterial cell membrane. And what happens is this causes rampant inflammation. So the more LPS you kind of get into the gut, the more likely you are to have that LPS leak into the bloodstream and kind of within the deeper layers of the gut, where they're going to activate mast cells and cause inflammation, histamine release, and all that, and it's going to lead to leaky gut. Interestingly enough, when we look at people with IBS and people who are healthy controls, they make a similar amount of gas, but the people with IBS have much worse symptoms. They feel worse, etc., etc. And this is due to something called visceral hypersensitivity. In other words, all of the stuff we mentioned with the fermentation, gas bloating, the increased solute, and especially the high amounts of LPS. This can actually cause the enteric nervous system, which runs the gut, to work improperly, to make you kind of more sensitive to things, to distension, for example, and cause kind of wonky motility and things of that nature. Who might benefit from restricting FODMAPs? Well, first off, people with functional gastrointestinal disorders such as IBS, IBD, etc., SIBO. Restricting FODMAPs may help you out. There's a bunch of different studies showing that low FODMAP diet seems to work in a number of functional gastrointestinal diseases. Those with unexplained GI issues, unexplained gas and bloating, diarrhea, etc., etc. If you're having these issues, restricting FODMAPs for a time may be helpful for you. And those with extra gastrointestinal issues, meaning issues that probably couple with gastrointestinal issues, but they're not the same. So things like fatigue, dizziness, brain fog, and allergy type symptoms. A very popular approach to addressing gastrointestinal diseases, at least up until recently, has been the exclusion of gluten from the diet, thinking that maybe these people have something called non-celiac gluten sensitivity, and this is eliciting gastrointestinal symptoms. However, there's something else in gluten that can cause very similar problems to what people with gastrointestinal issues who think they have non-celiac gluten sensitivity believe, and these are called fructans. These are a type of FODMAP found in wheat. Several studies find that fructans are the real culprit for most people that get gastrointestinal symptoms from eating bread. So it's not the gluten, it's the fructans. And a review on the topic found that only 16% of people who believe that they are non-celiac gluten sensitive, only 16% of those people are actually sensitive to gluten. They get a better response by restricting FODMAPs or something else. And interestingly enough, 40% had a nocebo response. What that means is they believed they were getting gluten and they are actually getting a placebo, and the placebo caused gastrointestinal effects, which kind of gets you to understand that probably the fear that's incorporated within eating in people who get gastrointestinal symptoms might actually be provoking the symptoms in a very bad way, considering 40% of the people had a nocebo response. This is a review of a number of different randomized clinical trials, so it's a pretty solid study. But why does this matter? It matters because if you're trying to make good decisions, it's hard to make good decisions on bad data. You may think it's the gluten, so you decide, you know what, I'm going to have some gluten-free bread. Gluten-free bread has all of the FODMAPs, so you're going to eat that bread and you're going to feel like garbage. Additionally, a lot has been said about sourdough being better for many people, and a lot of people think this is because the microbes within sourdough bread break down gluten a little better, but in all reality, there's very little FODMAPs in sourdough bread as well, so it could be one or the other. The important take home here is if you're somebody who thinks you're non-celiac gluten sensitive and you just avoid wheat altogether, you're doing the good thing because you're also avoiding FODMAPs. However, if you're deciding you just don't want to consume gluten and you're going through all these gluten-free products, you could still be causing problems. It's just going to kind of cause mass confusion for you because you're going to think, oh, I found my problem, it's gluten, and then you're switching to these gluten-free breads and your symptoms are coming back. You're going to blame something else because you really do think you have non-celiac gluten sensitivity, so you're going to think, oh, maybe I have a problem with oxalates or salicylates or whatever. So it's just really important to understand what is actually causing your symptoms. That way you can make better decisions. So what happens during a low FODMAP diet, particularly in people who have problems with FODMAPs? If you have unexplained GI symptoms, IBS, IBD, generally speaking, you see a decrease in the GI symptoms. You get improved visceral hypersensitivity, and there's actually some evidence that you're rewiring the gut in a beneficial way if you are sensitive to FODMAPs when you restrict them. You get improved intestinal barrier strength. Again, that's going back to if you have a lot of these FODMAPs making it into the colon, you're going to get a lot of bacteria reproducing, fermenting. You're going to have a lot of LPS in there. It's going to get through, cause an inflammatory response and weaken your intestinal barrier. Reduced inflammation, same mechanism, and reduced systemic histamine, which can elicit allergic symptoms throughout the body. It can also play a role in causing leaky gut as well. So if you're having GI problems, restricting FODMAPs may help you with a number of gastrointestinal as well as extra gastrointestinal problems. Now, it's important to point out that there are drawbacks of a FODMAP diet. So high FODMAP foods are generally healthy. FODMAPs also feed beneficial bacteria. So here we're probably talking about the dose is the poison. If you eat a ton of FODMAPs, you may get a response that is negative. That could mean that you're either eating the wrong types of FODMAPs for you, or you're just eating too many FODMAPs overall, delivering a lot of carbohydrates to the colon. Another recent study found that a higher FODMAP intake actually improves insulin sensitivity, so that's not really something you want. And one final major problem with a FODMAP diet is a lot of people stack restriction diets. So if you're using a low FODMAP diet, at least the restriction phase, and then adding other restrictions such as salicylates or oxalates or whatever, you're going to end up eating only a handful of foods, and you're probably going to have a less than nutritious diet. We have two fundamental approaches to FODMAP restriction. It's important to point out before we jump into these that both of these are going to end in the same place, not total FODMAP restriction. You're going to identify the FODMAPs that work for you and develop a personalized diet that does have some FODMAPs that don't cause problems. The first is probably the most popular approach, the top-down approach. For 6 to 8 weeks, you eliminate as many FODMAPs from your diet as you can. Then over the course of several weeks, you gradually reintroduce higher FODMAP foods and find out the ones that work for you. Then you eventually get a personalized diet that is working for you currently. Over time, over the long term, you want to re-challenge because maybe you kind of shift that microbiome in a way that now allows you to eat some more of these higher FODMAP foods or different types of FODMAPs you didn't tolerate before. The second approach is the bottom-up approach. This is easier in many ways for people. It's a lot less, you're going to get a lot less dramatic of a response to it. But two benefits, it's a lot easier. You're going to start with your current diet. You're going to eliminate specific foods that are higher in FODMAPs from a high FODMAP list. You're going to assess your symptomatic response after 6 or 8 weeks and then restrict or reintroduce as needed. This is going to cause kind of the least disturbance to the microbiome, which can be a good or bad thing. But the point to take home here is just kind of constantly restricting FODMAPs is probably going to have a detrimental effect on your microbiome. So it's important to find out what works for you and to incorporate some into your diet. This is a list of high FODMAP foods. This comes from Kate Scarlotta, who is a registered dietitian. She has great information. She has a great list of high FODMAP foods, low FODMAP foods. So here you can just kind of take a gander of this. I'll post a link down in the description of the video so you can access it. It's great. It covers basically everything you need. Whether you're doing a top-down approach or a bottoms-up approach, this tells you the foods that are really going to be the ones that elicit that are going to be kind of at least in the ballpark of things that are going to elicit symptoms. So eliminate these foods, either take them out completely or do a one-for-one swap. Take a high FODMAP food and swap it out for a low FODMAP food. However you want to do it, you need to make sure that you're also getting adequate nutrition when you do a FODMAP restriction diet followed by reintroduction. Some important things to look out for if you decide to undergo a low FODMAP diet, or if you think FODMAPs might be a problem for you. These are kind of some triggers that you might see. Daily binging, particularly on the weekends. This is not a situation where you're necessarily intolerant to FODMAPs. It's simply just you are eating way too many, and way too many are getting to the colon. Same thing, just eating too much. It's not necessarily, you may be, on a percentage basis, you may be eating a low percentage of higher FODMAP foods, but the total amount of FODMAPs you're consuming is high because you are just eating too much overall. High FODMAP meals as well. These are, if you have IBS, these are probably going to cause some major issues. So we're talking about meals that might have 3, 4, or 5 high FODMAP ingredients. Again, if you're doing something like the bottoms up approach, it's important. You want to target these high FODMAP days. If you don't have high FODMAP days, you want to target high FODMAP meals, reduce the FODMAP content in those meals. do the swaps or just eliminate them altogether. Or finally, what you want to do is you want to find your thresholds. There's probably going to be an amount of FODMAP that you tolerate just fine. You want to find out how much that is, stay below that, get the beneficial effects of FODMAP restriction, and maybe your gut will stabilize in a way where you can reintroduce some things that you were previously intolerant to. If you do decide to do a low FODMAP diet, here are your goals of the entire process of the FODMAP diet, including the restriction, the reintroduction, the personalized diet, and then the re-challenge later on down the road. You want to find the offending foods, so go through your diet with a fine-tooth comb, find out foods you might be eating that are high in FODMAP that might be causing problems. Next, you want to find tolerable doses. So maybe they're just foods you enjoy so much, and these are the problem. Maybe consuming only a little bit of these, so maybe for a week half the amount that you have each time you consume it, and then over time decrease it even more. Identify that personalized diet for you, identify what's good for you, try to make it as diverse as possible. A lot of people think FODMAP equals fiber. FODMAP does not equal fiber. There are a number of high fiber foods that are not high FODMAP. The problem with the FODMAPs are they are rapidly fermentable because they're short chained carbohydrates, so they can be fermented very, very quickly, so they can cause gas and bloating very, very quickly. Other fibers are more kind of time delayed. They take longer to ferment, so they're not going to elicit the same number of symptoms. And finally, understand that the goals of a FODMAP diet are not about FODMAPs are bad. They are not appropriate for you at this time. You may have genetic conditions that prevent you from eating certain foods at certain levels. You may simply just have dysbiosis or some sort of temporary issue that over time you may be able to fix and then improve so that you can reintroduce more FODMAPs in your diet. Thank you very much for listening into this video. As always, if you have any comments, questions, or constructive criticisms, please put them down in the comment section below. If you like this video and want more like it, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, share on social media, hit the thumbs up button below, and let us know how you're liking these videos. We like doing them for you. We like making sure that you have good, accurate information and don't get pulled into the whole social media zeitgeist where everything is a toxin and everything is problematic. So thanks for listening in. Take care, and we'll be back next week with another video.